doing. You were there as well. I was very happy to see you not fade away, but sort of. So hopefully there is some dialogue going on.
We have good students. Taking care of them.
No, I'm very impressed of my miscommunication perhaps. So I was kind of delighted to see that. I offered to the talk to the brilliant audience, also many years back, 6 years back or so, I was jumping on board an initiative that was really housed by him, this ESSC project, and I slowly grew into understanding a little bit more about the GBC literature, which paradoxically, or perhaps more interestingly, in tandem to my own learning, has and is being taken up now also in the international business community. Perhaps initially, but there is something going on which potentially opens up a whole new range of research activities and potential for future collaboration. So the title is really, and I, as a business, so we do mostly work in the realm of big firm or the suppliers in international contexts. So this is part of a paper, a book chapter actually, that is under review with a handbook that Gary Giraffi, Stefano Ponte from Copenhagen, and a lady called Gail Reichert, a former PhD student of Cali, but actually who's now at somewhere in London, Royal something, in London, works a lot in the industrial sector, IT sector, in value chains. So they have a book coming out in preparation. We have submitted a chapter there, which was deliberately invited because of my fascination and interest, and also some of the recent work that we've been doing on the ambition to bridge intellectual theoretical backgrounds of IB, international business, with the GBC narrative. So I think that the literatures can potentially reinforce each other. So I was indicating I need to make a bit of an assumption here. I did need to make an assumption that this is a graduate audience. So again, perhaps Teresa, Alfonso, and other colleagues from the faculty might have already heard some of the stuff. I guess you're all well read. But I was preparing this with a view that there is a graduate audience. So we'll very quickly go into essentials that underpin effectively the proposition for what the engagement between IB and GBC could be looking like in the future. And that's what I'm trying to do now. So really foundational for an understanding of why I feel, and in fact, I should say myself and Noemi, my wife, she's also an academic in the area of international business, which gives us a bit of a problem, right? We have to stick together in the same institution because nobody else wants us. Hardly anybody gets academic couples, so there is a kind of an agency that our dean currently holds. But also there are increasingly some institutions which are interested to buy us even as a couple. So there is the agency of the deans is not perfect, I should say. But please don't communicate this back to them. So anyway, the key assumption or the key background which we have here is that the fascination that I, as a researcher in the area of international business that we have with GBC analysis is really that it goes after a phenomenon which, of course, an understanding of phenomenon which also in IB has been taken up but from a different perspective. Really, it's around the management of externalization in the global context, and specifically lots of the work that is out there in the GBC arena really talks about the structures, how are the sectors set up, how do the interfirm relationships perhaps look like, and what are predominantly you would always read around governance issues and what are the structural configurations underlying governance. And the key outcome variable that lots of the GVC researchers are doing and focusing on is on upgrading. The equivalent thereof in the IB context would be innovation, but upgrading is conceptualized and theorized in a somewhat different way, and it does not necessarily completely match up with the innovation literature that we have in the international business context. So there is specifically the notion of upgrading for sectors or firms within sectors, which is important for the global management literature. And well, in this audience, perhaps I can be talking a bit more loosely. I could say the fixation of IB is probably not on the smaller units of analysis, smaller suppliers. Perhaps it's more on the big firms, and it's thereby the notion of upgrading, or what does it take for suppliers to upgrade to improve themselves functionally with respect to products, perhaps even freeing themselves from the stranglehold of the dominant multinational is not necessarily what international business researchers normally would look like. So another concept that is very important is in the GVC literature is really also this notion of power. And there is perhaps an equivalent in the IB literature, which I have also contributed to, around the notion of asymmetry in power relationships. So there's some smaller suppliers who are sort of working on behalf or to fulfill requests from the buyers when, for instance, outsourcing is taking place, or when they are building motherboards on behalf of the big multinational HP, IBM, and the likes in offshore locations. So really, conceptually, what the global value chain literature, this is sort of my take on it, what conceptually the contribution of the GVC analysis is doing. It focuses strongly on the notion of the input-output structure of the GVC. So sectoral analysis, how does it look like from the production to the consumption? And the graphical depiction, very minuscule, but you get the point, I would say. There are the inputs and the various actors who are engaging in the fruit chain, in the fruit production chain. So you would have the various inputs, then you have production stages, you have packaging, taken either at the exporter or intermediary stage, or in the local warehouses, facilities of, for instance, the likes of Tesco, Audi, or Lidl, onshore in the UK or in other countries, processing, and then the distribution market. So the input-output structure is a defining characteristics that the GVC literature strongly looks to examine. And IB, in a way, is different because IB only looks at interfirm relationships. So this complete sectorial analysis. So if you look at the IB text, I assume you agree with my point here. The IB books, they are on firms and the activities, how the firm promoted themselves, became successful. Usually it's in IB books you will read about the success stories rather than the failures. Actually, only one famous book that I really recommend for literature by David Ricks, who talks decidedly about IB failures. He is focusing on this notion of cultural, what is called blunder. So that's probably one of the very few where failure can be instrumental in learning. Most other IB books are really about firms and the success stories. So a little bit different perspective, or substantially different perspective when you look at sort of the actors involved. Multiple actors, of course, research-wise, that would be done on the basis of case studies, in-depth case studies, or sectorial analysis with multiple stakeholders involved. In the IB context, usually it is sort of two actors, ideally two actors, and from a bi-directional perspective, meaning that ideally you would be able to get responses from the suppliers and the big buyers, despite the fact that this is actually quite difficult, because that's in terms of the publication exercise that is more likely to lead to success. If you have dyadic, what we call dyadic structures, you usually beyond the dyad in IB you wouldn't find much work. There is the second dimension in the GVC literature is the geographic scope. So this would be the bubbles would be indicating, for instance, the agro-food sector, where is the production and where is the which bubbles and the consumption, where is it taking place. Food production in million tons. That is what is the higher the bubbles, the more production of particular, so the sector is organized across the world in an input-output structure, but also geographically dispersed. So this is the important contribution of these case studies which we have. And then the third dimension, which is really crucial, is how is government. This notion of governance, who is the lead firm, and how is the industry organization taking place. So industrial organization thinking in the 1885 or so, jumping off from effectively Porter, right? So at the time when Porter came in and did this analysis and introduced effectively in the literature the notion of value chains, basically the disaggregation of the functional components of the firm. This is when the global value chain literature emerged in the economic sociology context predominantly, and Gary Geographic was the key proponent there. And he was kind of thinking around this in a wider way, globalizing what are the implications in terms of the input-output structure, in terms of the geographic scope of these variegated value-generating activities, looking at the various functions of the firm and how this is all governed. And the governance, and this is also, I think, is probably the most significant theoretical contribution above and beyond the current discourse in the international business literature, is that the governance is broken up into intermediary steps. So market versus hierarchy. If you go back in the IB literature to Paul's seminal paper, and I'll give you a couple of examples of the kind of books which could be used in order to read up on that, is really on internalization theory, Buckley and Kessin's internalization theory. Really, it's all about, do we do it inside the company or do we do it outside? So internalization, are we organizing the international production of distribution services and products ourselves? Or, so this would be the hierarchical approach, right? So is there is an integrated firm, or on the other side, is it that we are kind of letting the market transactions themselves, right? Because there is a set of smaller producers available, which would be acting on the stock market and immediately in the business. And really, the contribution, I would argue that or the difference, looking at these three dimensions of it, the difference between IB and GBC comes from this theoretical interest that at the time the GBC crowd had in trying to understand really what is going on in this in sectors and what are the outcomes for the outcomes of production for local stakeholders. So what are the social and environmental outcomes? This is something which is embodied and integrated in the GBC literature much more than it is originally in the traditional IB literature. So recently then in the local context, so that would be happening in the global context. Recently, more and more the work has, on the basis of three these fundamental assumptions, has been then going into upgrading, embodying or trying to examine the local institutional context and also the industry stakeholders, so multiple stakeholders. There's also a connection, I don't want to wish to make this now to GPN. So if I went into an audience in Manchester, there is the so-called Manchester School of Economic Geography that developed, and I'm not saying that because I'm from Manchester, it just happens to be indeed the strongest cluster in the political economy discourse and the economic geography discourse. So, for instance, this comes out of a book from Dicken. Peter Dicken, now retired, he sort of was the founding father of this discourse of economic geography. And these people have taken the GBC discourse another level, I would argue. For the sake of simplicity in this context, I'm actually almost dealing with it in a synonymous way, although that is not really acceptable, of course, to an economic geographer. And indeed, some of the discourse that takes place, specifically the meta-level institutional imprint that takes place from the firm onto the from the institutional environment onto the firm. This is something where really the economic geography literature has a lot to contribute. And again, in IB, this is not coming in with Peng institutional theory or Richard Whitley, who is a business systems analysis. There's a couple of quite popular books, not popular, but famous books. It's a difference, right? so less well sold, but very impactful on the scholarship. 1999 on business systems in Asia and so on. So very briefly rushing through, I said, how could we define what is the core of IB? And really, in order to understand the core of IB, also I outlined already a couple of differences between GDC in going through the GDC slide here. IB can be defined in some sense by the top journal in the field. You go to the web page tips.net and you would find the editorial guidelines there. You would find immediately what is sort of the key message that wants to be disseminated according to the editors. So activities, strategies, structures, and decision-making processes of the multinational enterprise. I think it's not a coincidence that this is the very first statement on the web page in the editorial guidelines. If you go into the IB GIPS editorial now, recently, I think it is like 5 years ago, another colleague came on from University of Toronto, Rebecca Ruber. She is well known in the area of international entrepreneurship, and I think that also shows that the field is emerging, right? So the definition as to what IB does, not only multinational enterprises of large scale, but also increasingly there's a recognition of agile institutions, smaller scale on the compliance terminology or the bracket of entrepreneurial, small firm entrepreneurial firms. So that's also taking on, but really it's the unit of analysis, and this is the key point here, the unit of analysis is more the firm, right? With an intermediate, small, large firm. Certainly always an international firm if there is not an international firm. So they said, then it's not IB. And that's a very important point to make. So I've been doing, there's a nice bibliometric software available, which is from Leiden University, which does effectively help to sort of graphically depict core streams of research. What you would see here is the literature in GIPS in the articles between 1976 and 2015. And if you look very briefly, so there are a couple of clusters here. You will see firm views on, for instance, foreign subsidiary management, interaction between all headquarters and subsidiaries, the cultural differences, trust relationship, joint ventures. So firm level work on these topics have been key defining the international business literature. Then you will see here, there is more the notion of foreign direct investment, FDI exporting, so the way in which firms are internationalizing. And then you will see here also market entry choices on. So a couple of clusters. Peter Buckley wrote this up in kind of a very important paper in IB in 2001, I believe. That was the perspective paper where he asked the rhetorical question. I don't think he himself, in 2002, I don't think he believed in it himself, but the good rhetorical question is international business running out of steam. And he says, perhaps, at the time he says it differently from how it would look like today, but he was explaining effectively this graph in various stages of interest with respect to the firms. Right? So there is an initial stage of interest post-war until the 70s, where a lot of research has been going on. How do firms make investment decisions abroad? So multinational firms which are extraterritorial or multiple territories, but key stakeholders make decisions. So there's agency in terms of the decision-making in place. And this is what was the preoccupation initially, and that until the recent attempts to integrate further and open up also the idea, as I was pointing out, to the IB discipline to SME internationalization. And most prominent, I would argue, and perhaps a very good connecting point to global value chain literature is the notion of the global factory. But again, from the perspective of the firm. So in a sense, and I will bring this in just now. So there's a quite important, almost like an attempt to colonize, you could argue, as we are all politicians in some sense. We're trying to colonize a different literature streams. So there is a colonization attempt of the global value chain scholars. There's a colonization attempt, and it's called global value chains have certainly with what is 2011, the World Investment Report was basically giving the highest level of political legitimacy to the notion of the value chain, because it is a politically and it's a good governance tool. It is a very good tool to understand what's going on in the world economy within sectors, within chains, and also as a consequence for politicians, quite important to understand how do we participate. Looking at the assumption that we want to participate and we are still on the neoliberal side of things rather than post-Trumpian type of area. But understanding with this type of understanding, the global factory concept in IB is one which really looks at the firm. This is a graphical depiction of this 2004 paper with Paris Gowring in Gibbs, where Peter Buckley first coins, Peter Buckley and Paris Gowring first coined this the notion of the global factory, and in effect, very similar. If you look at it, there's an upstream dimension, there's a downstream dimension, so it's kind of underpinned. Although you don't see it visually, but you could underpin it with the Porterian value chain, or you could underpin it with Stengi's smiling curve, which is now credited to Ramo Dambi. Stengi is the CEO of ASA, who was giving interviews at the time in 2001 and was saying, you know, what makes ASA so happy is when we are both dominating on the R&D side and on the market side. So you could very nicely sort of underpin this. I'm deliberately drawing a smile here. You could very nicely underpin this with Stengi's or the smile curve depiction and kind of connect these metaphors or connect these figures together to suggest what is actually going on in IB to make sense of this international externalization. And the interesting thing here is what you see is that the argument in this paper, in what they're calling the global factory paper, is really that it is almost like a strategic choice. Yeah, the multinational, the headquarter, the multinational with its tentacles of subsidiaries makes a strategic choice as to what to retain in terms of the most precious assets within the boundaries of the firm. So this, if you think back of this graph, I will show you internalization versus market, right? So hierarchy versus the market. Very clear, just what is done within the firm boundaries, what is externalized. And so the internalization theory that Peter Buckley and Mark Hussman introduced underpins this further. It's just in a very relaxed, theoretically, you could argue in a very relaxed way, the outsourcing phenomenon is defined as a strategic choice by the key actor, the multinational, to hold on only to that assets or that activities in terms of the production which are most value generating. Right? So for in terms of the smile curve, most value generating when you look at the iPhone, this is the most frequently utilized example because it's so easy to relate to. Upstream, if we retain redesign capabilities and R&D capabilities, but also control downstream the customers with our activities and all the other activities along the smile curve. Most importantly, this contracting, manufacturing, assembly that we do away with. So theoretically, a very focused and obviously a very interesting, from an IB perspective, very focused approach. A focused approach on suggesting that it's a strategic choice, but the governance mode is not as complex as it would appear in the context of GBC literature. There's a nice follow-on paper which is sort of attempting to bridge these different views regarding the notion of the global factory. Again, a very interesting paper, I would argue, which sort of embraces Gary Geographi's 1989 approach of the global value chains, whereby saying, okay, the emergence of a global manufacturing system in which the production capacity is dispersed and unprecedented number of developing world as in industry. So this is a paper in academic management perspectives, whereby basically an attempt is made to conceptually link it together. And the conceptual linkage that Buckley and Roger Strange is at the University of Sussex in the UK, that they're making is that they are suggesting there are different interpretations of what the term global factory actually means. So according to Geography, they are suggesting it is sort of this dispersion of the manufacturing process around the globe. And there is an earlier work by Grunwald and Flam is to do with the product life cycle and the idea that you sort of would offshore certain activities which are no longer viable in your home country. And in Buckley and Gowry's paper, as I was showing earlier with this graph, it's this preoccupation of the firm to the multinational, the dominating multinational, to slice up the value chain or to slice up its functional orchestration and outsource everything that is not of strategic importance and keep within the firm boundaries what is retained to be important. And then all of that, so in a sense, from Buckley and Gowry, and thereby from a key international business theory perspective, offshoring is still explained via internalization, right? Internalization theory. That's a very interesting kind of a theoretical departure point. So they are bringing this up as differences. I think you can go into the people. So the global factory concerns in international business, I think it is important to highlight that recent literature, and some of it is coming out also from my own work or our own work. We are sort of on a journey here to bridge this intellectual debate, you could argue, which exists, whereby there's somewhat a firm headquarter orchestrator, global factory orchestrator perspective on the one hand, and there is a kind of a much more sectorial perspective as per the GBC. There is some aspects which cannot be easily explained, and so, for instance, the significant power asymmetries between small suppliers in emerging economies and the bigger multinationals in supplying in outsourcing relationships that cannot be easily explained. So this paper, for instance, which we have in 2016, I think it is an EOG or European International Journal of Management. What we bring up there is a term called promissory contracting in the context of the Bangladeshi garment factory. It sounds like an oxymoron. Promissory contract, you promise to get a contract, but indeed that's what happens with the garment suppliers in Bangladesh. So every year they're sitting together with the buyers, and the buyers say, yeah, let's carry on as we did in the last year. So there's never ever a contract. So in effect, agency theory thinking or internalization thinking that we have now, it doesn't really help us to explain what's going on, right? Because we are outside the contractual zone. It's an outsourcing, but only on the basis of a promise. The relationship can be potentially improved. That's something which we highlight in this paper. That in fact some suppliers who are in a high power asymmetrical relationship manage, despite the fact that they are only contract, promissory contract suppliers, so they don't have a real contract in hand, but they are sort of the chosen supplier for a particular bunch of stock, and they still manage. And this is something that the IB literature cannot easily explain. They still manage to learn, because in the IB literature you would expect that learning takes place within firm or contractual relationships. So here there is no formal relationship, there is only informal relationship, and still some firms manage to learn. So in effect, an assumption that the IB literature and also the entrepreneurship literature has been presuming until very recently is really that newly industrialized economies, suppliers, or emerging market suppliers actually don't have their own resources. Right? We slowly come to a realization that the EM&Es sort of make up the resource scarcity in various strategies. Some of your suggestions in your book. With respect to the small suppliers, there's still an assumption in our literature that there is actually a significant resource asymmetry, and they will not make it up unless consciously derived from learning according to a willful learning allowance given by the MSc. But we try to close the gap. We have some questions.
But I think that the fact that there is no formal contract does not prevent learning. You learn from doing an activity, whether or not that is formalized. What they have there, what you described, it's interesting. It's just trust, or at least they depend on one another. If they don't have a contract, they probably understand that they are better off working together, even in the absence of a formal contract. But there's learning anyway.
Well, I mean, we would need to make a detour also with respect to, for instance, in the IT context, there would be modular relationships, which would be in the GVC context. So there is like, it depends on, according to the governance, how easy is it to specify a particular task. Right? And in this context, for instance, there is learning taking place despite the fact that it is not easy to codify the tasks underlying the production. And these theoretically underperforming and not well equipped, under-resourced suppliers manage on their own, almost like Till Eulenspiegel, you know, they grab themselves by the head and push themselves out of the swamp. So they are managing to learn, interestingly enough, despite power asymmetry and despite not having adequate resources. So theoretically, that is a quite interesting phenomenon, which again, I would argue in the international business literature has not been properly addressed. That's what we are trying to do in this specific context. So let me move on to the connection between GDC and IB in terms of empirical studies. So there's one chapter which you might want to have a look at that just came out now in 2018 in a book by Jennifer Jones, Jonathan Wiebersdorf, who it's called the Routledge Compendium to the Geography of International Business. And in that, we have a chapter where we actually solidifying the argument that GVC is gaining traction in IB. For instance, I'm now on sabbatical in Temple with a guy called Raimo Dambi, quite a famous scholar. And he has made a strong name himself, a very strong name in utilizing also GVC terminology and economic geography perspective. He has been also contributing to that literature, and you will find stuff in the Journal of Economic Geography and so on. But despite all of the popularization, I just recently, as I was pointing out to some of you, I was at the conference in Canada, where again there was the invitation of the Academy of International Business chapter on the geographies of international business. So there's an increasing dialogue, but empirically on the ground, not so much work is yet published in this field, and what we call not yet a complete level or a good level of integration. So when we look at the papers, and that's what we did in this specific book chapter, we look at the papers who has not only referred, a strategic side to the work of Gary Geography, but really not touched upon governance, upgrading, or the notions of criteria which define which sectors we agree and so on. So that's what we were looking at. So we were interested, why is the solidity integration, and this is the finishing point I will come to. What would be a potential way forward for the GVC community benefit from international business? So not only to think around what is potentially useful for IB in terms of GVC. I have a paper on this, I don't know, a couple of years back, a very short paper, but following a presentation that was given at the conference. And then this is sort of now an attempt in this contribution for this book of Gary Geography and colleagues to try to think around what would be a potential and where would it be beneficial for the GVC scholars to benefit. So essentially, I want to convince Khalid as an example, why is it useful actually to wear an IB hat sometimes, right? So this is just how we did go about. As an example, there is a paper by Khalid himself in a special issue that we had in IBR on rising powers. So what we did, we looked at, for instance, one criteria is the really good integration to look at the author name. So there's like 70 or so in the author's affiliation, because sometimes people publish here and there. As an IB scholar, you might publish in a geography journal, just so it happens because there's a special issue, or an IB scholar might publish in a sociology journal. But really, it doesn't necessarily mean that because it's published in sociology or in a geography journal, it's really a deep engagement with geography or with sociology. So one way we could encapsulate this issue of research engagement is to look at where are people coming from. So this is an example of engagement. Although honestly, I have to say this is an engagement which took place because I, as an editor of the special issue, took the liberty to challenge them as a third reviewer and to say, listen, this is going to be coming out in an IB paper, so I want you to focus on this and this and this. And so we had actually here an exception in one paper, one of our colleagues, understanding the role of firms and the organization of GVC networks. In this case, it's in the textile sector. Some firms, in this case, a Taiwanese firm, going to the Middle East, Jordan, setting up shop there, doing almost like modern slavery type of work, flying in the workers, and there are implications for the way how we conceptualize firm, right? What is a firm which is no longer headquartered in Taiwan, although it is listed in Taiwan, but sort of working to the conditions of another labor market, conditions of another country. So this would be an example. We did this deep citation analysis and interpretation by looking at, okay, what kind of citation are they using? Is it a strategic site or is it something where it's really in-depth engagement? And then we come up with a taxonomy of engagement, and we will see here is the conventional M&E-based perspectives, and this will be other stakeholder perspectives, which is taken in the IP study. So in total, a real integration you would see is very low. So you would have total papers of only 4 here, and that would show that analytical complementary to IP theory is not many papers that we would find out there as of yet. This is in the book chapter. I'm happy to circulate to anybody, and you could distribute if you wish further. Also, yeah. So the key takeaway is really from that is that IB continues to have a strong firm perspective, while GVC is more interested on the sectorial analysis and on the outcomes, in a sense, the lens of governance and upgrading. And in order for these two fields really to engage more solidly, not only do we have to read the work properly and digest it and cite it not only strategically, but also really with a kind of an attempt to make a contribution above and beyond what was previously done, but it needs us to understand what are the fundamental premises. So there are some IP studies which could benefit, and what I will be talking about now is really where is it that the IP perspective could benefit the GVC literature. So what I talked about up until now is kind of an outcome of looking at, all right, so where is it that IP could benefit from GVC, and now this new work is sort of looking at, okay, what could IP actually contribute to GVC, and how could we thereby, because GVC literature has been politically and for policy makers extremely impactful. And we're doing all great work, managerially, perhaps also relevant, although we're not always maybe well communicating with the managers, but certainly some of our published work is not as widely cross-pollinated, I would argue, as the GVC work. So in a sense, I would argue that if we manage to get into the networks of the GVC people, actually it would benefit the international business discipline a lot, because we would be then taken more seriously with our level work as well, with policymakers would probably have it. So the fundamental premise which I am starting off with here in the last 10 minutes is really, okay, according to Forstrand, we need to look at the functions or the theoretical lenses of each unit of analysis of the M&Es. Most importantly, there are the theoretical underpinnings of all that I'm talking related stuff is really coming out out of this book from Grazia Elettokilis. She has a very economics-based approach to things and explains. It's a graduate book, it's excellent. I use it in some of my own theories of IB teachings. Or this other one by Mats Forstrand. This is really, I would argue, a very good Bible and overview on what are the theoretical underpinnings of the multinational. So the IB canon, the IB literature, the IB canon, I would say is probably best captured in these two books. And there's also some collection by Christoph Spitalis in the nature of the transnational from very economics based. And then of course John Dunnings and Sarian Roman's book. And this is the recent one, which I was pointing out, Geography of International. This is where this perspective which we had here is also coming in, and there are a lot of authors thinking on economic geography perspective. So it is kind of as an example, Lou Ko or Henry Young from Singapore, very prominent scholars who making a contribution. So if you look at the book, that's what I'm highlighting here. If you define the multinationals as per Mats Forsgren, there are 6 perspectives which he's offering. In the last edition, actually, a 7th perspective, although only very casually alluded to. There's the dominating multinational, coordinating multinational. So that's all explained by internalization theory. I don't talk about this at all, and I only give this overview. This is the matrix. He writes really 250 or 350 pages on in total on these 6 perspectives. The book is a guide through the whole journey through the 6 different perspectives how I define ID. So I ignore those for the sake of argument because these are defined by internalization, and internalization is actually the stepping stone from when GBC branched out into a different direction from ID. So in 1984, 1985. So really that's not so exciting. But what the GBC literature certainly, because this is an overlap between what IB and GBC has in common. But what IB has developed ever since, a vast literature on the knowing multinational, or this paper by evolutionary theory, right? By what's it called? You help me out now. Kogel and Sander, sorry. Designing multinational. This is basically a contingency theory approach. Then the networking multinational, this is the huge amount of literature that comes out of Uppsala itself. So the business networks and the relationships within the business networks developed by the lead multinationals. And then the last bit is kind of institutional theory. He calls it the politicizing multinationals. So these are the kind of 4 perspectives. This is the type of holiday rules here. The knowing multinational, knowing. Yeah, it's another. He uses this term instead of evolutionary theory or knowledge-based theory of the multinational. So he uses those, and I'm using because this is kind of teaching. This is a book that we use in teaching, right? So it's one of these ways how to look into the canon of the IB literature and what we are asking. What I'm asking is, so okay, if we go and take this IB canon to the GBC people, what could they potentially find interesting, right? So when we look at the perspective of the knowing, Kogel and Sanders approach, so then basically the argument would be that the capabilities of the multinationals are completely inseparable. You cannot separate it from the organizational routines. So theoretically, we have a lot of knowledge, right? Capacity or capabilities are built, transferred across geographical borders. That's what the knowing multinational actually suggests. And so if we combine that with the recent claims in IB by Voss and colleagues to go into the micro foundations, so how are managers actually making decisions and how are implementing the decisions, I think GBC researchers could find quite some useful inspiration from an understanding of the knowing multinational. For instance, to understand supply capability development, because there is been theoretical work in, for instance, strategic management journal, have a paper out on capability lifecycle. So how can you improve your positions, and this would help, the theoretical framing by underpinned by the knowing multinational. Recent work, 2011, I think that's quite an influential paper where GBC scholars have published something into world development, but combining it actually with a business system, specifically innovation systems approach. So this is a very significant paper for IP scholars, but also for GBC scholars themselves, combining it with the notion of the multinational, the knowing multinational, because that would allow them to understand that in certain institutional contexts, the learning of suppliers or partners, lead firms that takes place is a function of the national innovation systems which they are operating. So that is another example of where this framing or this theoretical contribution that IB has on offer could help GBC scholars. And the last bit is further going down the road of institutional development. So we have this as a couple of papers. One has been coming out already in 2017. One is currently under review with MIR, where we're looking at Pakistan. So it's a terrorism-prone, hostile institutional environment. So there is an increasing recognition in IB that we need to deal with these institutional environments. And in fact, this work can help to understand further upgrading and downgrading from specific sectors when combined with the knowledge perspective of the multinational. So in this paper, for instance, what we have is a micro foundation based understanding as to what is it that the managers in Pakistan actually have to do in order to insert themselves in the value chain of the multinationals. And the managers situated in Germany or in the US are actually just cannot be bothered having to deal with an institutional environment where a normal business trip is just too dangerous, right? So some of the suppliers have managed to offset the local pressures, to offset the local dangers, and still being able to contribute. This is in a specific context of software supply. So very, very interesting when you combine these intellectual silos, what can happen. Let me jump over that because I'm on others. Designing multinational, perhaps. Let me focus on the design of the networking multinational. So the networking multinational really, as I was indicating earlier, is the business network multinational. As per the Uppsala business network theory, there is probably 200, 300, I'm not sure how many papers out there, which we could draw. It's a real theoretically convincing and compelling argument which makes us understand how the management of multinationals is interacting in the headquarters interacting with subsidiaries, and also which subsidiaries are kind of taken more seriously than others. So how do you, as a subsidiary, go, as Birkinger would call it, come into the in crowd versus having to fall out of love, right? There's this love-hate relationship kind of picture which is being depicted in SAJ and a couple of papers. Or how do Cyril Buki and Birkinger this work on headquarter agency, right? So there is a lot of work here that can help us to understand the networks of MNEs, inter-firm networks, and when we transplant that into the GVC context, when we have inter-firm relationships not within the governance structure of the multinationals, but beyond, what would that mean? Where could they potentially in the GVC area derive useful benefit from? So Voss, who is arguing for more micro foundations, would, for instance, then come into play, and we might be better able to understand facilitators or inhibitors to upgrading of suppliers in specific offshore locations. Also, a recent paper that we are now doing, have been doing again in the Bangladeshi government sector, where we were saying, okay, on a micro foundation level, it is so important to understand what is the ethical predisposition of the suppliers, what is the ethical predisposition of perhaps a compliant headquarter, whether that be Monkey or GRI compliant, standard compliant multinational, but what is the ethical predisposition as exhibited by the managers? That will determine whether these partners can actually in a beneficial way network work together. So a lot of more things to do. I show only one thing, methodological contribution. I think that IB can make to GVC analysis. We are very rigorous. I think anybody who's working in the area will know that from our review processes. So we are going significantly beyond single case studies. We now ask for multiple case studies, also embedded case studies. So there is some literature here, again, and colleagues that would support it. But I would argue some of the methodologies, some of the stuff that I was talking about earlier, structural equation modeling as an example, can help in exploratory research. And this is something where IB scholars with dyadic data actually have the nose ahead, I would argue. So that is something also where we can make a very sound methodological contribution. Some of the examples here For instance, the Gene paper in 2017 on cases of CBSM on the key drivers of the innovativeness of suppliers. So that's something which is rigorously undertaken. It goes beyond multiple case studies. It's really survey-based. So that would be an example of work. Also in the qualitative domain, and more broadly, I think the contribution that IB can make is really to open up the black box of the firm. The GVC researchers still would argue, admit themselves, so all these conferences would openly admit the strategizing process, the way in which we make decisions, the way in which we internationalize is not necessarily well understood in the GVC context. The unit of analysis has been in the IB context of firm, and this is where we can insert useful methodological and conceptual expertise. Also on secondary data, a few resources, I will share that with you. Unfortunately, I've been talking a bit speedily and a lot, but I hope I can share with you at some stage, perhaps in 2 months, the final article, once it's accepted. The intermediary stuff, this I can already share with you, and hopefully you'll find some of that as an inspiration for research question setting in the times when IB scholars actually also want to contribute to the debates in global value chain analysis. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions?
And is there some question? I have a question. Knowing that everybody's talking about the 4.0 industry, how this kind of change is going to change global value chains?
I think this is an excellent question. Actually, this is on my kind activity to do with that in starting a project with people in Finland. Conception, unfortunately, it's not yet well advanced. We call it location-independent manufacturing. It's an example. Nokia already is designing sort of boxes. It's like containers with the ship, and then the design. The ambition is to keep the digital management process in Finland, in the area where we have been doing some sounding and scoping visits in interviews in Karelia. This is close to the border to Russia. They are very concerned with implications for local labor firms. And so the interesting thing is here, of course, the general notion, yes, how is
explain a little bit more about this?
Well, it's related. Location-independent manufacturing is just a term that some technicians or engineers use instead of Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 has been emerging in Germany and it took its way, but Industry 4.0 perhaps, and that's why these people who are using LIM as a terminology is not necessarily indicating so much the geographical dispersion of the activity. So there is an example which we have been exploring. The other examples, a company called Route Defense, in which I've been visiting recently. This is they are doing the products that are going on with paper mills, like the whole paper mill routing with suppliers, and they are also quite keen on location manufacturing. So the idea would be, how do you, almost like a project, set up manufacturing capacity at a specific location where the project is to be set up, and then once it's finished, relocate or take the production facilities to another place. So that is a combination of IT, Industry 4.0 technologies, also with the ability to shift it on the world. That is something I'm toying with that, and yeah, I'm fascinated on the theoretical.
It's like the maquilas that Gary Gerefi studied.
Yeah.
Because you can move around.
It's fascinating, yeah. So theoretically, I have no clue yet, but I would frankly, right? I would assume, and that's why it's fascinating. There is a significant change in terms of how the value chains are governed, organized internationally, and who is controlling in terms of the key from the IB perspective is who is holding the key assets. So in the Finnish context, Karelia, the government gave a little bit of money for this to be done and to sign up because they are keen to have the managerial and the technical engineering prowess to retain in Karelia around Lake Saimaa, whatever they are off east to Helsinki. So that's there is a regional development perspective in there in the story, right? So how do you incentivize specific knowledge, specific technologies to be available in locations? So there's a regional policy dynamic in there. There's a firm incentivization, small entrepreneurship support story in there. So how do you make sure? And there is the IB story of the traditional, which is sometimes probably too much research story, internationalization. So how do you set the project off-site internationally, right? And where do you locate it? And how do you make sure, according to the factory model, that you retain the managerial prowess to oversee and hold, the capability to manage whatever is being produced at the local place. I have a PhD student. I'm co-supervising a guy from Kazakhstan. And apparently the government there wants to invest huge sums, and they see that it's an area of regional or the competitiveness. Again, what we're trying to do is develop an understanding of what can firms actually offer, right? And all these stories around how do you upgrade, on how perhaps do you inhibit upgrading because you want to retain the unique resource from the industry. Developed country or from the lead firm perspective, you want to suppress capability development. From the perspective of the local supplier and from the regional development, you want to allow it. So there are conflicting demands intellectually and analytically. These need to be embedded in a research project. But I think it's exactly where this interaction between GDC and IB is becoming interesting, right? And where theoretically we can have dialogues. Yeah? Sometimes we are losing each other. I mean, it took me many years to understand what Khalid and colleagues were talking about, because I come from this management perspective, and they are talking always about sectors, and they're talking about the chain and upgrading, and I didn't understand. Now I think I have a feel for it, but I think there is an opportunity really for a fruitful dialogue intellectually, and of course in terms of what we can get published, but also how we can have impact locally with respect to the sectors engaged with managers. So I have no answer to what will happen, but something is going to happen. And it's very, very exciting to research it.
And which is your unit of analysis? The firm?
Yeah, I'm actually
the country, because most of the research on the industry is on, the China versus Germany or US country.
Yeah, so I'm increasingly interested in still firm level, but supplier, smaller scale supplier. So kind of those guys who are acting on behalf of lead key orchestrators. I mean, it's fascinating, of course, the lead firms to see how they operate and how they're working, but really what is the leeway that the smaller suppliers have in this is something which I find particularly fascinating. This one was alluding to in Bangladesh is one example. I've also talked to people in Lianfeng, they are one of these large orchestrator firms based in Hong Kong, and I find this fascinating what they're doing, but really I think from a social and environmental impact perspective, it's also fascinating to look at the suppliers who are working on their behalf, and that's something I want to explore further.
I think that can continue.
My question, sorry, I really enjoyed your very exciting presentation, but I had some doubts in terms of you presented the global factory as one structure for this integrating essay with GBC, and then we finished with another perspective coming from a book with 6 different characters. How do you connect the two analytical frameworks that you're using in terms of ID?
Oh, hopefully, sorry, I was probably a bit sluggish in the explanation. So, what I tried to say is this paper by Buckley and Strange, right, originates really with the paper in 2004, Buckley and Gibson, Global Factory is being introduced, and then 2009 is a paper in Journal of Wellness. Peter has been churning it out like very quickly. Even a paper in Journal of World Business on the contribution of the global factory to economic development. I would argue there is not a very strong economic development argument or perspective in this type of work. So I'm saying actually in order to engage with the GBC literature, we would need to fit this in. There's a paper by my colleague Moyamin in 2011 where he actually talks very critically, a really interesting read, because intellectually, we all have built ourselves very, very strong arguments and silos. And so, of course, if you have strong intellectuals standing in front of yourself, it's very difficult to uproot the arguments because they're volatile. And Moyamin struggles in this paper, in my opinion, for a while until he finishes off to suggest actually the development options of the global factory model, global factory are not very, very strong, right? So this is one of the most provocative statements in this paper. So I don't think that this is easy to reconcile. But what I'm saying is, by understanding what is the underpinning idea that originated a particular path of literature, we can then perhaps more meaningfully engage. So in idea there is also this notion of legitimacy, right? So legitimacy theory, or in India when we talk about CSR, it's the notion of license to operate, to be within a DNA. In our own work, we were using this for business model as a way to understand whether sustainability items are really deeply embedded in the organization or not. So I'm saying, by trying to understand how do we critically engage with a more sectorial and politically ambitious literature perhaps, or narrative discourse, then we perhaps can convert some of our attention not only to the performance outcomes of the firms, but also to the ability of a firm to perform, but also on a social and environmental basis. So legitimizing themselves via their actions, not only legitimizing themselves in terms of financial viability. So that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to make here. And I think theoretically that's all in development, and perhaps there are some inconsistencies in what we are writing here. But I think theoretically the interesting thing is really how could we have a very strong, we have a very strong understanding and a rich body of literature around how firms strategize, how firms managers make decisions, what's the optimal configuration of our resources. I mean, we have it all, right? But how can we then combine that with a more sectorially oriented and inclusive approach that I would argue that GBC is offering? So we have something that they could benefit from. Effectively, in this Jones, this last one here, this was part of a panel where Peter was on and I was on, 2000 whatever, something. It came out in 2015. It's quite interesting because this is where Peter was making the point of opening up the black boxes. So honestly, I would say the black box of the firm is the social, environmentally, the political economy context. The black box of the GBC literature is the firm, and that we handle very well. So that's where I'm thinking there is a possible protection, a possibility to provide.
Okay, thank you for a brilliant presentation.